Welcome, everybody. This is our last. This is not a drill for 2020. I know some of y'all are going, "Phew, thank God that year is done." But as we are thinking about 2020 and all of the things that came with it, all of the drama that came with it, the pandemic, the economic fallout, the assault, the constant assault on Black people, we also have to remember the truth, the truism that when we fight, we win. So we just want to update everybody who's watching knows that we've been protesting in front of the mayor of Los Angeles mansion every single day. We've been saying that he is the worst mayor in the nation. Don't choose him for transportation. We've been saying Garcetti is dirty as mud. Don't pick him for HUD. We've been trying to block him from Joe Biden's cabinet. And we found out yesterday, or we claimed victory yesterday, when on Tuesday it had been determined that Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, which could be a whole nother conversation, was confirmed for the final cabinet seat for which Garcetti was rumored to be being vetted. And so we claimed that victory yesterday. We had a tremendous final last day of protest, and it was just incredible. And then just tonight, if you were watching Spectrum News, Garcetti finally said that he is not going to Washington. He has no plans to go to Washington. He will serve out his term in Los Angeles, as if that was his choice. It was not his choice. We successfully blocked him from that position. And the reason we're lifting it up is not just because we want to gloat a little bit. We do. But it's also because when people say, what can we do? And we say, come out to this demonstration or come out to this protest or sign this petition. You know, folks don't always understand that when you do that, that's really generating community power, that's generating our collective power. That is the definition of the power of the people. And the power of the people always win as long as we're invested in working together collectively. And so we have yet another victory that we're ticking off. We got rid of Jackie Lacey. We have done some really tremendous things, and now we successfully blocked Eric Garcetti. And so for everybody, the hundreds of folks who've been out braving COVID, right? Braving a pandemic, enduring police violence. You all know on Saturday, December 6th, LAPD was unleashed on us and they brutally beat us, sending 2 of our folks to the hospital and arresting a third. There were dozens of others injured who were not hospitalized. And the hundreds there were all deeply traumatized, including young children. And so we are again saying that struggle, that sacrifice is not without reward. So thank you to everybody who contributed. So I mentioned that we are still in the midst of COVID-19, and we braved it in being at the protest because we believe that the assault on Black people is another pandemic, right? And so we can't just sit home, but we attempted to engage in what we call our civic duty, our sacred duty, responsibly. So we were always masked up. We attempted to physically distance, and attempted to exercise best practices. What we're hearing now is that this COVID-19 vaccine has been rolled out. We have seen all over the news that there are now 2 vaccines that are supposedly safe. And if you watch MSNBC or CNN or any of the news channels, even your local news channels, there's a lot of propaganda telling us this is, you know, the saving grace, right? This is going to be what moves us out of this period that is one of the most distressing periods of our lifetimes. And people should run and line up to get this vaccine. They are trotting out, this is my own, because I know there's people who have differences of opinion. This is my own feeling on it. They're trotting out specifically Black folks to get Black folks to sign on and say, we'll get a vaccine that was in the works for less than a year, that hasn't been tested sufficiently on Black folks especially, and we should be celebrating it. And what we're seeing when we look at the initial numbers is that only 14% of Black people trust this vaccine, only 14%. Now, a slightly higher number are willing to get it, willing to take the vaccine, but only 14% are trusting this vaccine. And so we're going to have a really candid conversation about that. We have 3 phenomenal guests. Dr. Gina Guillaume, UCLA Harbor, right? Medical Center. Is that where you are, Dr. Guillaume? Thank you
Harbor,
so much.
UCLA, you got it.
UCLA, yes. UCLA Medical Center. Thank you so much.
Harbor, UCLA, sorry about that.
Okay. So is it Harbor, UCLA? Harbor, UCLA, yes. She is here with us. She is a medical doctor, and we're gonna get some perspective from a medical doctor who has the best interests of our people at heart. We also have LaShira Nolan, who is a second-year Harvard medical student and one of the leaders of the student body at Harvard Medical School. I think the first Black woman to hold the position that she holds in leadership. She's going to speak with us from both a medical perspective, but also clue us in on some history that, you know, some people think that we're being paranoid by saying we don't trust the vaccine. But there's a long history of Black people being used as guinea pigs, of medical racism and medical apartheid happening, of vaccines being said to do one thing and doing something else. And so we need to understand that history. And one of those who's been at the forefront of the struggle around what vaccines mean for Black people, and really trying to push our rights to say yes or no, to be discerning about what it is we want to do, is a brother who has been a brother to me in many, many ways, who has made sure that in the midst of struggle that we're safe, but also who has been willing to fight back against the medical establishment that says that we don't have the right to move in the way that we need to move. Brother Riza Islam is with us to talk about what this vaccine means for Black people and what tools we have to say yes or no, because I see your shirt, not another Tuskegee, right? What is that history, and what right do we have to say yes or no, especially in a state like California that says we no longer have the right to claim religious exemptions, that the only exemptions are medical exemptions. So we want to be very clear that we're not telling folks what to do, but we do want to, I'll be honest, we do want to be real, that when people say that these are conspiracy theories, Black people are being irrational, when we are being circumspect and wary of a medical establishment, that this is logical, because this is a part of the history that we've had with the medical establishment. And so we should speak candidly. We should be able to come to our own conclusions. And that's what we're hoping to offer tonight on This Is Not a Drill. So I apologize for the very long intro. There have been some internal conversations about my conspiracy realism. So I say I'm not a conspiracy theorist. There have been actual conspiracies against Black people, and we can't neglect that, especially as we kind of try to figure out where we want to go in this pandemic moment. So Dr. Guillaume, can we begin with you? I would love for you to frame what it means that a vaccine has been rolled out. If you've been watching the news, there's been deliberate attempts to really make
Mhm.
sure that Black people are on board with this vaccine, even though the data says only 14% of us are trusting it. We've had religious leaders and
Mhm.
political leaders and medical leaders. I haven't seen the Surgeon General in months. He hasn't been talking about the pandemic almost at all, but tomorrow he's slated to go on national television and take the vaccine himself. What do you see when we're talking about a pandemic that's real, like we're not
Mhm.
COVID-19 deniers, right?
Mhm.
But also this idea that Black people are wary of a
Mhm.
vaccine that hasn't been widely tested.
Thank you so much, Melinda, for setting that up and giving us context. And I think that that's what triggers a lot of hurt in the Black community is when historical context is not given. Just as you said, you know, there's labels put on Black people, whether it be non-compliance, fear of medicine, distrusting doctors. And if you think about our medical education, how we're taught is to take a good medical history in order for us to carefully assess our patients and plan to treat them. We always have to take a good history. That's basic practice. Unfortunately, when those labels are put on African Americans, it basically we're making that assessment and that plan without considering the history. And to be honest, that's a form of medical malpractice. Just as you said, there's reason for us to be afraid. I took a Hippocratic oath, right, to serve and to protect my patients, to prevent disease. But unfortunately, that Hippocratic oath was not offered to a lot of African Americans for centuries. Instead, they have been giving involuntary treatment, painful treatments, harmful more than beneficial treatments in the past, and it has caused a lot of distrust. Thank you for rocking the Not Another Tuskegee shirt, but this has been going on since 1619 when the first slave ship arrived to America. And I hope we can get a little bit more into those kinds of histories, but this is what we're dealing with. This is the legacy of a country that has a very shameful, a very dark past. And this is the legacy that's left behind from generational trauma. I must say, though, where we are as a nation carrying the most COVID cases in the world right now, we're seeing surges that are quadrupling. Right now in California, the statistic is that 1 in 80 people in LA County have COVID. I'm having to see our ED, our emergency department at Harvey UCLA, be converted into an ICU. We have body bags that are being delivered to our hospital. This pandemic is real and people are dying. But more importantly, I want to highlight that Black people are dying at more disproportionate rates than others. Right now, yes, there is 2 vaccines. The one vaccine that our hospital is going to be administering as early as tomorrow, I believe, is the Pfizer vaccine that's been approved for emergency use. Just as you said, Melinda, it was approved within a short period of time, but it did go through the appropriate regulations through FDA, through the Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices. Those were followed. And I have to comment on that, that even though it appears as though it was rushed, the process itself was still followed in terms of regulation and practices. And I know there's a lot of fear that we didn't have a lot of Black participants within the study, but there was about 9%, 9 to 10% of representation of Black people across different countries like Argentina, Brazil, the US. It wasn't just one side, it was multi-sites and diverse. My fear is that if we as a community do not get vaccinated, that the gap that we have, the disproportionate gaps will continue to widen. And then the risk of not getting the vaccine might be greater because of all of the complications and the surges that we are seeing. So I think this is a very complex issue, but I thank you for opening this up and talking about it.
Thank you for that. And you're right. It's a very complicated kind of space to be in, right? So Black people are dying at higher rates, and Black people are being hospitalized at higher rates. In fact, the start of This Is Not a Drill began at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we started it right at the very top of the pandemic, lifting up that, you know, there was more for us to be concerned about. If you remember back in March, we didn't know if this was the end of the world, right? It felt like a dystopic novel or movie. And we were trying to figure out what was going to happen. But at the same time, we've endured and lived through experimentation on Black people. And a question, we see all the questions coming in on Facebook. Please continue to drop those questions there, and then we'll ask our panelists shortly. I failed to introduce myself. My name is Melina Abdullah. I heard you put the D in there, so I just want to give you that pronunciation. It's Melina Abdullah. And I wanted to introduce myself also for the Facebook audience. LaShira, Nolan, can you pick up on this conversation that Dr. Guillaume has brilliantly led us into, that this is a complicated set of questions and set of decisions to be made? Can you walk us into this, and what are you getting as a second-year medical student at Harvard? We also want to I also failed to introduce Pro Bono ASL, and Dresden is on. Thank you so much for translating for us. And Brianna was on before him. Thank you for translating for us. We really appreciate you. LaShira, what do you have for us?
Yeah, so first I just want to say to everyone, and I would have to agree with Dr. Guillaume in that this did not start with Tuskegee. I think like we often think about Tuskegee as the reference point for this, but as she said, it started in 1619 when our people were stolen from our home and we were brought here and our labor was extracted in order to erect this country. And it's really interesting because the relationship between Black people and medicine was that medicine, they were here to make sure that Black people were able to continue to do the work of slavery so that we could continue to do this free labor. So their job was to make sure that we were healthy enough so that we can continue to do the work that slave masters needed us to do. And then there was this time of experimentation. So you had Black women, Lucy, Archana Betsy, who were worked on by Dr. Marion Sims. And basically he's known as the father of gynecology, but he worked on these women without giving them anesthesia. And you also had, as we started to have medical centers be erected, a lot of the cadavers that people were using, they were coming from Black graveyards and cemeteries, and they would often have Black people go and dig up other Black bodies in order to use in these laboratories. So the relationship that Black folks have with medicine is one of great distrust. And I think that started when, like I said, when they stole us from our homeland. And I think the interesting thing about Tuskegee and how I see it is different than the experience that we're having now is that with Tuskegee, they knew that folks had syphilis and they allowed the disease to progress. And once the cure, penicillin, was discovered, they did not give that to them. So they let them stay sick. And then that went on, you can pass syphilis on through the placenta. So then that went on to affect a whole nother generation of Black people. But the reason why this is different is because we have the vaccination. And this is something that I believe has been proven that could be effective for our communities. And they're actively giving it to us. So I think that it was different with Tuskegee because they were withholding the treatment, but in this case, they're actually trying to give us something that has been proven to be potentially effective. So I think that, as you said, this is a complicated conversation that I think we all need to have, and we deserve to be able to ask tough questions. And I think that we deserve to have all the time to make this decision. But I think that with taking time to make that decision comes the risk of getting COVID. And I think that in my experience, I work with COVID patients every Tuesday, and this disease, is nothing to play with. 1 in 800 people, who've 1 in 800 Black folks have been those who died from COVID-19. 80% of the kids that make up those who've been infected by COVID-19 are Black and Latinx. So our communities are being impacted. We're the ones who are the essential workers. We're the ones who are more likely to live in intergenerational households, the ones who are more likely to use public transportation, the ones who are less likely to have PPE. So we're really keeping our society going, and we have not been protected. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to protect ourselves if we get to a space where we feel comfortable enough to trust the government. And do I think that they've earned our trust? I do not. Because they've allowed us, like, December 31st, the moratorium on evictions through the CDC is going to end, and we haven't heard anything from our government leaders. And Black people have continued to suffer, and they've been quiet. So I think that it's really going to be on us as a community to come together and say, what do we need to do to move forward? And I think that starts with conversations like these.
I'm so glad that you all are taking these positions, because now I can completely rip my mask off and say I'm in the 86%. I'm not in the 14%. I've already made plans with my kids. If they make vaccinations mandatory, we move it, because I don't trust it. I don't trust it. And I think that it's important that I'm not a COVID-19 denier, right? But it's important for me to watch it play out on them first. I want Donald Trump and his family to take it first. And I want to watch what happens over the period of years. Like, are they going to develop a third arm, right? I don't know. I don't really know. So I just think that there's some validity. I hear what you're saying, that what I hear, and this could be wrong, what I hear is an affirmation that the medical establishment has absolutely engaged in unethical and problematic and racist and even deadly acts against Black people. And I would say, yes, it goes, it began before the Tuskegee experiments, but it also continued beyond it, right? When we think about the number of Black women who die in childbirth, the number of Black babies who die in childbirth, when we think about the unwillingness of hospitals to treat Black women, especially, to see us as being more tolerant of pain and not giving us medicines that we need because they think that we're overblowing it or overstating it. That's what we're talking about. I can think about my own experiences with the medical establishment, having had 3 children and watching them almost watch me die giving birth to my 3rd child. And my mother thankfully was in the room and had to advocate for me. And when I finally, because I'd already had 2 children, I know what childbirth feels like. I could feel my uterus tearing. And I told them I feel like I'm tearing. They would not believe me. And my mother had to advocate. And when they opened me finally, my uterus was rupturing, right? I watched that happen. And so they have not earned our trust, right? They continue to experiment on us. And I think that that's part of why 86% of us are not trusting this vaccine. But I think there's a more specific history around vaccines that Riza Islam, you've been really front and center, not just in California, but nationally around Black people and vaccines. Can you talk a little bit about that work and also talk about what you see when you see 2 COVID-19 vaccines being rolled out so quickly?
Absolutely. First, I'm going to say peace be unto you, to everyone, and assalamu alaikum, Sister Melina. I definitely appreciate you for always including me in anything that we do. And of course, for all the good work that you do within the community, because we worked side by side on many things throughout the years. So again, once you called me, I was actually out in DC speaking on this very subject with some of the frontline doctors. And as soon as you call me, I said, you let me know when and where, and I'm there. So I just want to thank you very much and show you appreciation for that. I'm going to say first off here, to those who are on, thank you to the sister who was a doctor, to the sister, I believe, who is currently at Harvard, I believe, and all of those who are participating. When it comes to vaccines, the first thing we have to understand, the reason why I have the shirt that says not another Tuskegee experiment is simply for the relation, simply for it being known as it pertains to this particular topic in this particular area. The experimentation of us has gone back beyond 5,000 years in particularly, so we're all correct on that. One thing I'm going to just make a slight adjustment on factually to be factual here is 1555 is not when we were landed here in Jamestown, Virginia. It was actually, pardon me, not 1619, it was 1555, according to the Library of Congress. And those 64 years is what they kept hidden because they were processing us and breaking us into Negroes. We were fighting back. We were actually fighting back and killing them and defending ourselves because we didn't speak their language. We didn't simply agree with what they were doing. And it took about 64 years for them to break us. And then that's what they put in the history books as 1619, but it was actually 1555. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to vaccines, doctors are not taught. And the sister who's an MD can bear me witness here. In the medical schools currently in America, maybe they have adjusted it. I pray they have. But to my knowledge, they do not have an extensive class in medical school solely on vaccines, solely on ingredients. And again, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but doctors are not taught. They're not thoroughly educated on vaccines, and particularly because that would actually violate the Hippocratic oath that you swore to when you realize exactly what it is that you are promoting to inject into people's bodies. If you knew what were in these vaccines, if you knew within good conscience, you would not participate in it. And which is why, again, they do not make it mandatory for doctors to learn about these, and they do not have them in medical school. Another point here is the Hippocratic oath is not a legally binding agreement. It is morally binding, which means, again, this is a low liability arena. And again, I'm not saying this to the sister who is participating. I want us to thoroughly understand that this system, when it comes to trusting it, we have to first make sure that they themselves agree to have liability, to take accountability up front, for them to say, we make it very clear that if anything negative happens to our patients, if anything negative happens to the people under our care, we take full accountability for that, and we will take full accountability under the law. We will pay the fines, we will go to jail, we will do what needs to be done because that was due to us, or what is called iatrogenic circumstances, meaning the circumstance caused by the doctor. They don't do that. When it comes to vaccines, in 2011, the United States Supreme Court ruled, quote, vaccines are unavoidably unsafe, end quote. When it comes to vaccines, the tetanus vaccine, just a few years ago, under the Bill and Melinda Gates administration, was rolled out, and it sterilized over 500,000 Kenyan women, as verified by the Kenyan government. This was admitted by the Minister of Health. They found a sterilizing chemical in it, and they came out and made this publicly known. As per 1993 in Nigeria, under Pfizer, in Nigeria, under the Nigerian directors of Pfizer, they were using an experimental drug known as Trovan, which killed 11 children in Nigeria and harmed many others. Pfizer is also one of the pharmaceutical companies that has now rolled out a vaccine in a period of time that violates the Center for Disease Controls and the FDA's standard of rolling out a full vaccine of safety. The safety trial takes no less than 8 years. So how are you rolling out a vaccine in 8 to 10 months? And yes, what I've learned from many of the scientists, because I meet with these scientists, I speak with these scientists, I travel all over the world dealing with this. I'm not a lay person when it comes to this. And what they have all told me, and what all the records show, is that yes, they have stated, due to the evolution of technology, we can simply use the spike protein from the virus, and that they didn't take the actual coronavirus itself, but simply the spike protein or the mRNA, so that the body can simply recognize it as a virus or pathogen, and then the immune will simply respond. This is what they have stated. But again, this violates the CDC and FDA's actual standard of safety process. So because of that, and a list of other things that I could continue to go into, including, as I stated earlier, the pre-existing conditions, and I'm going to yield after this, the pre-existing conditions as it pertains to why Black people are affected the most is because we have fast food chains all in our neighborhoods. We have liquor stores all in our neighborhoods. We have the worst water. We have the worst air. The majority of Black and brown people are living next to power plants, next to sewer plants, next to areas that produce chemical waste and sewage, etc., therefore creating the pre-existing conditions that pharmaceutical companies can then benefit from. So they created the pre-existing conditions and then say, we're going to give you the solution for it. So of course, we're going to have upper respiratory issues because you created it by way of you allowing the chemicals that will create those things to perpetually exist in our community. You don't mandate us to have domestic farmland. You don't mandate organic food in our neighborhoods. You don't mandate spring water. You don't mandate exercise or vitamin C, zinc, vitamin D, etc. But you do mandate something like this when it comes to vaccines, which they have not mandated yet, but they're pushing to indirectly mandate it by stating you cannot go to school, work, travel, etc. if you do not receive it. So I'll yield back at that moment, but I have a lot more to say once the time comes back to my end.
Thank you, Brother Riza. And in a bit, I want you to talk about the public policy aspect of it. So what we have in California, when you talk about mandates, that there can be mandates and you cannot claim religious exemption. So what does that mean? So in just a bit, I want to talk about that, but I want to weave in first some of the questions that are coming in on Facebook, and I'm going to kind of blend a few of them together, especially for LaShira and Dr. Guillaume. There's questions about generating trust. How does the medical establishment build trust among Black people? And I want to complicate that question a bit because we in Black Lives Matter hear that question often around policing, right? How do we get Black people to trust the police? Well, the police have not been a trustworthy institution, so maybe we shouldn't trust them, right? So I want us to think about this question of trust, because when I saw these questions being fed to us on mainstream media, that kept coming up, that if we put more Black influencers on, then we'll earn the trust of Black people. But I think the question is first, at least for me, and I would love for you to give some perspective here, is has the medical establishment earned Black trust, rather than like, should we, how can they kind of jump through hoops to all of a sudden in the 11th hour gain our trust? So Dr. Guillaume, you want to take that first?
Yeah, absolutely, I can. Thank you so much, Brother Riza, for all of your amazing rebuttals. I love it. What I would say is that right now, it's very complicated and it's a very loaded question, but it's truly the Black community that has galvanized and advocated for a lot of the changes that we see. And I'm thinking of the American Medical Association, who's the governing body of medicine. They actually did not desegregate until the 1960s. So that definitely already has led to a lot of discrimination, just a lot of marginalization in the Black community, and us not having access to those authority organizations and conferences. So it was honestly the creation of the NMA that helped to create a lot of the Black associations, having African Americans represented in governing bodies of medicine. So my answer would be no. I don't think we've, as a country, earned the trust of the people. I think it has been in great deal up to Black Americans to advocate and to fight for a lot of what we want in medicine and even now. To answer your question about how can we heal, I think where we started from the beginning would be a good place, is to start to acknowledge some of the hurt, some of the shameful history that happened in this country from the medical associations and not brush it off and not address it. I think we do need to start having some conversations about what happened, what's happening. And right now, I honestly also feel like resources from our governing bodies need to be put in to helping communities and like underserved communities and advocating for a lot of the dismantling of a lot of the capitalism that Brother Reza talked about, really addressing those social and structural determinants of health. If we can see that they're putting money where their mouth is, then yes, I think that would be a great place that we can physically see that things are being done to help us in that regard.
And LaShira, as you chime in on this, thank you, Dr. Guillaume. As you chime in on this, LaShira, one of the questions that comes for me, and I think that Brother Reza was good at raising this, is as we talk about pre-existing conditions, right? The real pre-existing condition for Black folks is racism, right? So we got dirty air, of course you have asthma, right? You have food deserts, of course you have diabetes. There's all these studies that some of my friends have been engaging in, psychologist friends have been engaging in about the rates of hypertension and high blood pressure that come from the ongoing pandemic of racism, right? So if you're experiencing everyday racism, then of course you have high blood pressure. So all of these things that they're saying are pre-existing conditions really can be, we can point back to environmental racism, we can point back to institutional and individual racism. So when you talk about that, in this context of building trust, I wonder if, you know, once we can topple some of these other systems that contribute to the disproportionate impact of the pandemic, of the health pandemic on Black people, if that would be kind of an earning of trust rather than a giving of trust. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that we need to look the most upstream to figure out, why do we have hypertension? Why do we have diabetes? Why do we have all of these different types of chronic diseases? And as you say that, we go to these terrible conditions. It's so interesting because there have been studies that have come out that have shown that if you look at a white person and a Black person who enter a hospital and both have COVID, both have the same likelihood of leaving that hospital perfectly fine. So, but what they've shown is that it's really what happens out in the community, because these folks are more likely to be essential workers, because they have these chronic conditions that are exacerbated by racism. That is what is killing Black people. So it's not that we're like inherently more sick because of genetics. We have to remember that race is a social construct. It's a political tool that they've used to then allow racism to continue and to create these arbitrary differences between people. And I think that when we have the conversation about mistrust and trust, I think that for me as a medical student, it needs to start there, the way that we're taught. There have been studies that have shown, like as early as 2015, that there are medical students and residents who think that Black people have less nerve fibers and that we experience less pain and that our skin is thicker. And that's just because of the way that we're taught. And whenever we learn about differences between hypertension and diabetes, they always kind of leave it with this one slide. And that's like the end of the presentation. And it says like, okay, you know, Black folks are more likely to die from this, but there's no explanation of the socio-political context that led to those conditions. So I think that those are the conversations that we have to start having in medical education. And then the other thing is, there's less Black men entering medical school now than there was in 1978. So there's a critical issue with the accessibility of a career in medicine. And we need folks that look like us who and understand us to be serving us. And I think that that's part of the issue now, because they kind of just expect that the 2% of, you know, Black women who are physicians are going to be able to take on this mantle and try to explain to our communities why this vaccine is safe. But if you haven't done the work to increase the pipeline and to make our communities feel like this career is accessible to us and that we can communicate and be in community with folks, then it's not going to happen. And I think that symbolic change is not what we need right now. And I think that by just plastering photos of Black folks getting the vaccine. We're smarter than that. And we're not just going to say, okay, well, this person's getting it, so I'm going to get it. But, I think that more physicians and scientists, they need to be in forums like this, answering the tough questions and having these conversations. And depending on community leaders and activists who've been doing this for years. And I think that that's how we really start to rebuild trust. And I don't think that they've earned it. I think that if you look at who has access to a lot of these academic medical centers, a lot of folks don't even have their insurance accepted at these places, but they're right in the middle of our neighborhoods. So I think that those are just subtle ways that you see, the mistrust carried out. And, they come out with, these anti-racist policies, but it's not reaching the community and they're not having these conversations. And I think that's where we need to go.
That was so good and so important that we got to go deep, right? We can't just say, oh, now the vaccine is out, y'all take it, right? But we have to undo so many different systems. We have to transform and reimagine so many different systems before we say, now you should trust us, right? So I want to remind folks that in April, was it April? It might have been March, but I think it was beginning of April. We convened virtually every single Black leader in the county of Los Angeles. So this was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And we wrote something called the Black LA Demands. Those demands are still up, tinyurl.com/Black LA Demands. And one of the demands was something that you spoke about, LaShira, that, they need to be helping Black students get to medical school, right? That we need to have a deeper understanding of what medical racism looks like and how we experience it. And there needs to be immediate protocols and interventions to dismantle medical racism and medical apartheid. And until we do that, you can't demand trust of our community because it hasn't been earned. Brother Reza, can you talk about, from a public policy perspective, I know you were at the front of the fight to maintain our right to choose or not choose to be vaccinated, right?
Correct.
It was before COVID-19. This was all vaccines when we were looking at, what was happening, especially to Black children who had taken vaccines, right? This whole controversy around mercury and vaccines. I was at one of your seminars that you hosted at Cal State LA around that. And I thought it was really, really important and vital. And I thought that, of course, California is not going to force people to take vaccines who have religious opposition to vaccines, but that's exactly what happened. Can you talk about those limitations and what we can do as we're looking at the possibility of COVID-19 vaccine either being mandated or saying that you have to take it if you're going to use public facilities?
Absolutely, sister. And I'll say thank you to Sister Lash and Dr. Gina for both of what you said, actually, because everything was right and exact. It is not an easy circumstance that we're dealing with. It hasn't been easy for years. And for those who are parents of children with autism, and for those who are parents with children who have debilitating neurological disorders, etc., mothers and fathers who listen to everything that the doctor said, listen to everything that the nurse said, went through all of the procedures, went according to the CDC schedule of 69 doses of 16 vaccines before the age of 2, or before the age of 6, pardon me. They went through every single step. They watched what it did to their child, and it was the exact same thing every single time. So to remove the rights of parents, as SB 277 did with religious exemption 3 years ago, as SB 276 did, what was that, a year and a half, 2 years ago, that is not constitutional. That is not humane. That is not logical. That is not proper when it comes to medicine. That is not proper when it comes to anything dealing with telling a parent, your child must take this shot or they can't go to school. Your child must take this shot or they cannot go to daycare. Your child must take this shot or they can't even go to private school, let alone public. That's not a proper way to handle things. So you're forcing parents to do something that maybe they would have already done if you would just allow them to have the choice. So the argument that we have always given is allow the person to have the choice, just plain and simple. I shouldn't be forced to take anything, good or bad, whatever you're trying to promote to me. So SB 277 in 2017, when we were speaking in front of Santa Monica, the not the Capitol, but we were speaking there against this, they told parents, and this is under Richard Pan, that we know more than you. When you're telling someone that religion or your religious belief or your spirituality is no excuse, you're telling them that you know more than God. You know more than the creator. You are above the creator. See, now I don't know if we understand this, but the system of eugenics is exactly what this premise is about. The system of eugenics in America, the forced sterilizations, for example, under the system of eugenics, did not stop on women until 2014. I want us to understand how serious this is. Just 60 years ago, they were still forcibly sterilizing women in prison up until 2014. They sterilized over 60,000 women in America, and California, once again, led the charge, sterilizing a large percentage of the women, Mexican and Black primarily. So when it comes to policy, the Buck versus Bell case, where they sided and said, well, yes, women should be sterilized because we do not want to perpetuate generations of feeble-mindedness. We do not want to perpetuate generations of illiterate, dumb, stupid individuals who are simply going to add and make a burden or perpetuate a burden on the public population. So they gave a medical justification to sterilize women. They even said that women, due to the enlarged clitoris, due to their enlarged labia, because they are sexually loose, we should sterilize them. This is what they stated. This was the Supreme Court. This is the supreme law of the land. So policies are what pushed this in America. And of course, that was justified under a medical pseudoscientific model under Francis Galton, which was the system of eugenics standing for good stock or good genes. It started in America, and that became policy under the American Eugenics Society. It translated over into what we now refer to as Planned Parenthood, which back then was called the American Birth Control League under Margaret Sanger, a eugenicist. All of this was policy. It became policy, 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 and then it transferred over into Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler, who he himself was inspired by California sterilizations using needles. He was inspired by Madison Grant. He stated about Madison Grant's book titled The Passing of the Great Race, that he refers to this book as his personal Bible, and that he studied the policies of America and watched how their policies evolved to get rid of those who are undesirables. They use all these names. These are the labels that they gave to justify what they were doing. And I'll say again, the forced sterilizations did not end until 2014 with the passing of SB 1135 under, I believe it was Governor Jerry Brown here in California. He is the one who signed that into law to protect women, because simply because you're in jail does not mean you should be prevented from producing children. That's beyond inhumane. And so again, that was just 6 years ago. So can we trust them? No. Have policies been in place to make it to where we can't trust them? Yes. Have shots been completely horrific when it comes to Black and brown people for the vast majority? Yes. And again, before I end this here, when they ask us, can we trust it? They've shown Black people getting shots on video, as if that in some way is going to sway me to forget everything that I just said to you and all the other things that have been happening. According to the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, we cannot sue a vaccine manufacturer if the vaccine has either harmed or killed us or our child or anyone. Vaccine manufacturers are held with no liability. You cannot sue them if the vaccine harms you. I can't trust that.
Right. And one thing I'll offer, Brother Reza, is when you say that there's a recent history of this, I want to say actually it's current, right? It's happening right now. Just a few months ago, we had Nurse Dawn Wooten on This Is Not a Drill, who was talking about the hysterectomies that were taking place unbeknownst to women detainees at the border. And so Sister Lamika Castillo hosted that conversation. That was as recent as just a few months ago. So we don't even have to go back 6 years. We can say, you know, as of 2 months ago, we know this to have been the truth. And I would bet that it's happening right now as well. One of the questions that's coming up that I think Dr. Guillaume can answer is there's a question about people who've already had COVID-19. We're hearing you, and we're hearing folks kind of have to weigh this decision about whether or not to take the vaccine. Right now, it's not mandatory. There's no requirement to take it to access schools, not yet at least, right? So, but it is a choice because we are thinking about what's happening in our communities. So one of the questions that's being raised is that if somebody has already had COVID-19, then do they have the antibodies and would they need to take a vaccine anyway?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So at this time, yes, they will have antibodies built up after the infection, but it's unknown how long those antibodies will be there. So at this point, the recommendation from the CDC is yes, you still can get the vaccine. I believe they're saying you could wait around a 90-day period before you decide to get it, just to give 3 months. But outside of that period, it's unknown how long the antibodies will be in your system. Sorry, you're muted, Melinda.
I just want to ask y'all. So I've shared that I don't plan to take the vaccine. I plan to. And I know we're not giving out medical advice, but I take a lot of holistic medicine. I believe in black seed oil and vitamin C, and I'll take the elderberry and turmeric and all that. I feel like at least, even if you don't believe in it, it's not gonna hurt you. I will say, for me, black seed oil has been phenomenal. I haven't been sick, knock on wood, in 2.5 years. With this black seed oil. I'm not ready to take a vaccine. I got to see what it looks like. I also know that here's another question that came up on Facebook. Am I just distrusting? Am I just mistrusting of the vaccine, or am I mistrusting of the whole medical establishment? So the answer to that Facebook viewer is both, absolutely both. And I just had an incident, Brother Reza, I think I told you about it and asked you what to do. When my teenage daughter was in the 10th grade and walked to the Kaiser around the corner from her high school, I told her to, because she needed a medical clearance to play soccer. That's all she was supposed to go in and do. And the doctor said, oh, you haven't had the, what's the one, HPV vaccine. We're going to give you the HPV vaccine. I'm not there. She's 14. And they give her the HPV vaccine without my consent. And a 14-year-old child doesn't have the strength to tell a doctor, no, I don't want that vaccine, right? I was livid. I didn't know how they could do it. But apparently the law is that they can, that a parent does not have to give consent for a child to be vaccinated. And so all of that for me says, I'm not taking the vaccine. My kids ain't taking the vaccine. We gonna ride it out with holistic treatments and prevention. I do some things that are also kind of strange. Like when we get in the house, we got to gargle with mouthwash, wash our hands all up to our elbows. I'm cleaning out our noses. Anything we can do to make sure we don't get COVID, but I don't want to take the vaccine. Are y'all taking the vaccine, and are your kids taking it?
I am going to take the vaccine. I signed up already and I'll be vaccinated within the next month. From everything that we know, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like a lot of our trauma right now far outweighs the trust factor. But where we are, it's very dire, and people are dying that we are seeing, that I'm seeing. And I would like to participate and possibly slow down the progression of this really, really dangerous disease. So I will be vaccinated.
LaShira, where are you on it? Lash.
Yeah.
And I know it's also different for both of you because you're in the medical field, like you're in and out of hospitals. What are your thoughts?
Right. So for me, considering the fact that I do work with patients with COVID and the fact that I do feel like I'm at high risk for contracting the disease, I will be taking the vaccine. And just beyond that, I do believe in public health, science, and vaccinations. I think that one thing that's important for us to know is that vaccinations, or the idea of inoculation, actually came from a slave named Onesimus from West Africa. In 1721, he showed Cotton Mather, who was a physician here in Boston, how to do the process of inoculation, which was taking pus from his lesion and then putting it in another, and that showed to slow the spread of disease. And it showed how it does actually prevent this from happening. And then that went on to impact Edward Jenner, who then created vaccinations. So I think that vaccinations themselves have power and do work, but I think that because of medical mistrust and because the way that they've really hurt and traumatized our community, and the fact that they have not been transparent in where we are now, and that is all validated 100%. But I do think after doing research and seeing that what's in this vaccination is saline, mRNA, and sucrose, I believe, I don't think that, for me personally, there's a danger. And I think it's important for people to take their time, answer the questions that they need, but just know that the more time that you take, there is going to be this heightened risk. But if that's okay for you, then that's okay for you. And I don't think that anyone should force you to do anything, but you should definitely make the best decision for yourself and your community.
And I think that's the point. I think that's also the fear, right? That are they going to take away our right to decide for ourselves? You used the term mRNA. Can you share for us what that is? Because we're not at Harvard Medical School.
Oh, don't do me like that. So yeah, this is, I know my grandma's out there. mRNA, Nani, here we go. So messenger RNA is basically like the blueprint that allows our cells to make proteins that allow our functions to happen that we need the body to do. So the mRNA is in the cytoplasm of the cell. So it's totally apart from the nucleus, which is where the DNA resides. And this is basically what's going to be used to generate the spike protein that is on the coronavirus. And the idea is that by showing the body this spike protein will then mount an immune response. So if you ever were to come in contact with the virus, you'll already have the antibodies that you need to protect yourself from it.
Thank you for that explanation. I also want to offer that when we talk about our folks who were enslaved, that we use the term enslaved people, not slaves, because our ancestors never submitted to that, right? So we were never slaves, but we were enslaved people. Brother Reza, can you give your last thoughts? And I also want to clarify that my children did receive some vaccines, but I want to have the right to determine which vaccines they receive and which we say no to, right? So I just want to offer that up, that we have knowledge and we have intuitive knowledge and we have the ability to discern for ourselves is my position. Brother Reza, what's your position?
Well, I think it's quite obvious what my position is.
So you're not
But I'll
taking.
say it this way: no, absolutely not. There is no actual, there's no proof that determines that it's safe or effective. This is how deep I want us to understand this. I'm not an independent researcher simply. My mother is a naturopathic doctor, formerly a medical nurse, who has very extensive training. She has her degrees and all of that. She switched to naturopathy once the pharmaceutical companies made a monopoly on medicine, and they switched virtually everything to medicine. When doctors would normally say vitamin C, they started to give pharmaceutical drugs. And they would normally say, drink more water, go out and get vitamin D. They would start to prescribe certain pharmaceutical drugs, et cetera, et cetera. So she saw the corruption take place at the turn of the 1970s into the 1980s. And due to her integrity, she couldn't sit there and just say, I'm going to be a part of this when I know we're actually going against what we know to be medically correct. biologically correct, biochemically correct. So she had to leave and become a naturopathic doctor, which she did. I'll say, Sister Melina, yes, I'm not taking the vaccine. 1, 2, when it comes to being a parent and having the rights. Currently, we're fighting against B23171, which is a bill that is going to prevent just that, which is trying to allow children up to the age of 11 to consent to being vaccinated without their parents' consent. That currently is a bill being put forth by Muriel Bowser in Washington, D.C. This borderlines the level of pedophilia. This borderlines a level of insane, disgusting behavior. How can you take a child who's not even 12 years old and say, I'm going to give you something here, and you can actually take them in a room by themselves in their school, not just a doctor's office, and you can bring in a nurse, bring in a doctor, and inoculate or vaccinate them right there, and the parents will not have to be notified at all. This is specifically what this bill says. The parents will not have to be notified at all about the medical records whatsoever. So this is where this is going. So for those who are medical students, for those who are doctors, integrity is going to have to rise now, because dealing with a government that, although your intentions may be good, I meet with these scientists. Again, this is not a researcher from YouTube. I'm not a YouTube type of dude. I meet with them. I just met with the frontline doctors and questioned them in front of the world on Monday in Atlanta, Georgia, where the CDC is, and they did not deny one question that was brought up in front of everyone. And these are medical professionals who have well over 20, 30, 40 years of medical experience. Next thing I'll say is the vaccine that we are all touting from Pfizer, according to Dr. Fauci, who is the scientist over this, and his lead scientist being Kizzmekia Corbett, a Black woman, he stated that this vaccine, although it may prevent you from being affected by the COVID-19 virus, it will not prevent you from transmitting it to someone else. So therefore, it may help you, and 2, it will not prevent you from transmitting it to someone else. So I just want us to think thoroughly here. And also, when it came to the recent circumstance and phenomena over this vaccine, 4 participants in the Pfizer study came down with Bell's palsy, also known as idiopathic facial paralysis, where half of their face, the muscles went limp after taking this vaccine. This is something that we have to thoroughly understand. And when it comes to understanding the vaccinating type of circumstance, although in slavery we were doing certain things, prior to the 1700s, the Chinese were the ones who were also using the type of using pustules, etc., transferring that to try to create an immunal response. But everyone in the medical field should know that the only surefire way or closest to 100% guarantee to be completely safe from viruses is to have a strong, healthy immune system. So the only guaranteed way is to build up the innate immunity, which is inherent within all of us, which is why we're alive today. While we're breathing right now, we're breathing in viruses, and you can all bear me witness of this. Our immune system is working. This is the only reason why we're alive. Without having any vaccinations, the only reason why the average human being is alive is due to God's native immune system. And vitamin C, zinc, which is what Dr. Fauci says he takes, and vitamin D, which is what this virus is cannot necessarily exist through. So if we're outside getting enough sunlight, that is another thing. And I'm not giving medical advice. I'm just saying when it comes to biology, these are things that help when it comes to the respiratory system, bringing in the oxygen and circulating the nutrition. So I'm definitely not going to take the vaccine. And I just encourage everyone to research, learn, be careful, make sure your body is healthy, and of course, make the right decision. But the government should not force us to take it, but you should have the right to take it if you so choose.
Right. And I wish we had more time to talk about that. The right to autonomy over our own bodies, right? And I wish we had more time to talk about that, but we're already 6 minutes over time. I understand that this has been one of the most popular installments of This Is Not a Drill ever. So people want to talk about this. I'm hoping that after the first of the year, maybe we can get some of y'all to come back and join us and let us know, how it went for you. How did the vaccine go for you? And maybe we'll also know what policy is looking like and what might be required of us or not required of us. So we hope to do that after the first of the year. This is the last installment of This Is Not a Drill this year. So we're taking the next 2 Thursdays off, and then we will be back January 6th, I believe, inshallah. We'll be back with the next installment of This Is Not a Drill. We want to thank you so much, Dr. Gina Guillaume, LaShira Nolan, Brother Riza Islam. We want to remind our viewers of our own power. On Saturday at 3 p.m. at Yvonne Burke Park, we will be meeting up for our Black Xmas demonstration. We do this every year. We've been doing it for the last 6 years. The first year was actually in partnership with the Nation of Islam. We're reminding everybody that we don't have to spend our dollars willy-nilly and give it to white supremacist capitalism. You don't have to give your money to Walmart and Target and Amazon, who are making record profits at a time when Black people are also being disproportionately impacted by the economic fallout of COVID-19. Instead, you can intentionally use your dollars to build Black organizations, to buy from Black-owned businesses, and make sure that in the season you also move your money away from banks that profit from our oppression and bank Black as well. So we say build Black, buy Black, bank Black. You can find out more at blackxmas.org and meet us on Saturday, 3 p.m. at Yvonne Burke Park in Marina Del Rey. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Guillaume, LaShira Nolan, and Brother Riza Islam. We hope to see you again soon. Oh, and before we go, wait, don't take us off yet. Pro Bono ASL, thank you so much, Dresden. Thank you so much, Brianna. And thank you for our behind the scenes folks, Megan and Rajay. Thank you for helping to produce this episode and always making sure that things go off without a hitch. Peace out, y'all.